Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my chess channel. This is International Master Camila Ciobanu, and it is my pleasure to discuss with you today what is the technique of winning a very peculiar endgame. We have this position in which white is to play, and it looks like at the first glance he could not win but only obtain a draw. Why am I saying this? Because even if white is one bishop up and one pawn, well, it looks like black is going to promote to queen, and we will see if white manages to block the passed pawn that is soon to be created on black's side. Well, we see that black has a pawn's majority on the queen side, so obviously he would like to push the pawn to a4, sacrificing it in order to unlock the path for the other pawn to go forward and promote. And let's see if the bishop will be there just in time to stop that from happening. But before going to the solution of this exercise, I would like to explore with you one quote of a famous chess player, and we'll go right there. So Rudolf Spielmann gives us a piece of advice, and that is to play the opening like a book, the middle game like a magician, and the end game like a machine. So in this case, his suggestion is to play the endgame like a machine, which basically means that we are supposed to calculate accurately all the variations that will assure us getting to the destination of our choice. Okay, so I would say that we can see the solution of this exercise. First of all, we have to see if the king can come right in time to stop the pawns. And we can see that the king is far away from the square. Okay, so now the king remains behind the pawn. And black can promote and therefore win. Okay, so let's go back. White can't approach black's pawns with the king. It won't stop them. In this case, we will see if the bishop gets there in time. So let's see, we will open the diagonal for the bishop to be able to come. Of course, we can't take directly because after b3, the bishop can't reach c1 in time to stop the pawn, and therefore black will promote. All right. So after a4, white should push the pawn to g6. In this way, if black takes on b3, white will bring the bishop to c1. Black sacrifices the pawn. And finally, black has a possible move, which is pushing the pawn to b3. And now it gives the move to white, and white has to pay much attention because it is very likely that the game ends with a draw by a stalemate. So now white's only winning move is to retreat the king to e5, because in this way the bishop no longer protects the pawn on g7, and this gives black the possibility to move the king up. And finally, white will protect the pawn on g6 with a discovered check, and white will win the endgame by simply bringing the king and then promoting the pawn to queen. Good, but the fact is that black, we will go back, black does not have to take on b3, but he can push the pawn to a3. In this way, when the bishop goes to c1 or whatever, on f4 or e3, in order to stop the pawn once it gets close to promotion, black promotes, and now he doesn't have the move pawn to b3 anymore. The king can't move, so this is a stalemate, and so it's a draw. Therefore, white basically can't push the pawn to g7. If white wants to win, he needs to find a way to make black's king to move away from the promoting square so that white can advance with his own king and then push the pawn up to g8. So if the king does not reach in time on the queen side, if the bishop can't reach in time, I mean, it can reach in time just to stop the pawn, but then it's a stalemate and so a draw. So what other options does white have? Well, in order to stop the pawns from promoting either on a1, okay, or from going to b2, the other pawn, we can see that these two squares are on the long diagonal, dark squares, and we have the dark squared bishop. So let's try another solution. Bishop to g7. Okay, so now we position the bishop in such a way to stop the pawns from advancing. Now black is forced to move the pawn. And now it's very important what white's decision will be, because if white takes on a4, then black pushes the pawn to b3 and he wins. Because when white unstops the bishop to stop the pawn, then the bishop gets taken and black still promotes and wins. Very well, so white can't take on a4. Therefore, now it is the moment to combine all the ideas. And how can white force black's king to move away, or at least try to make it move away? Well, white will sacrifice the bishop on h8. Yes, it is astonishing. It is a very, very beautiful move. So bishop to h8. Of course, black can't take the bishop because king f7 follows, and then g7 followed by mate, by the promotion to queen. Good. So since black can't take, let's see what happens if he either takes the pawn on b3 or if he pushes the pawn to a3. If he takes the pawn to b3, now it is possible for white even to bring the king to e7, either to e7 or to e6. Let's see what happens. Again, if black takes on h8, the same happens, king f7 with mate in 2. If b2, now white can take the pawn, and black can push the pawn to b3. He has another move. And finally, white can push the pawn to g7, king h7, and pay attention, not king to f7, okay, because it's a stalemate. Even if white pushes the pawn to g6, the king goes back to g8, and probably it's a draw. So king to f8 to leave the g6 square available for the king, and then white wins. Good, but it's not the same as when black pushes the pawn to a3. Why? Because if we bring the king now to e7, he will push the pawn to a2. We need to move the bishop away. If bishop a1, it's a stalemate directly. If bishop on f6, e5, d4, or b2, he promotes, we have to take, and this is again a stalemate, and that's a draw. So the secret here is to move the king on e6, because in this way he allows black's king to go to f8. So let's say black will push the pawn. Now we can stop it. And finally, white wins by simply pushing or bringing the king to h7, but it's much longer. And finally, by the same technique, white will win. So we found a solution to this intriguing endgame study, which seemed to be a draw. And let's see it from the start. Bishop to g7, pawn to a4. Now bishop h8 with a sacrifice, pawn to a3, king to e6, pawn to a2, white blocks the pawn, king to f8, check, king g8, king e7, king h7, king f8, and white promotes. All right? If black decided to take the bishop instead, either now or after a3, king e6, king takes, king f7, and can you see that it is a matter of only one tempo? If it was black's move, black would have promoted to queen and stopped white's pawn from going to g7. But since it's white's turn, he just makes it in time. to win. Wow, I really hope that you enjoyed this endgame. So we saw that what white needed to do is just imagine a way to stop black pawns, to make the king move away from the promoting square, and then white just combined the two ideas and they blended beautifully in the sacrifice with the bishop on h8. So in the endgame, it is so important to have the clarity to accurately calculate all the variations that will lead us to the final success. Thank you again for watching. This is International Master Camila Ciobanu. I invite you to like this video, to write a comment, and to subscribe to my channel. And I will talk to you in the next video. All the best to all.